Hey everyone, this is Keith Baker. I am the host of the Dancing with Cancer podcast, where we talk about how to live an upbeat, joyful life in the middle of the cancer storm. Let's go. Hey everyone, this is Keith Baker with the Dancing with Cancer podcast, episode 48, No Greater Love. So we are in the middle of this conversation about marriage, and Kathy and I recently celebrated our 45th anniversary, and after 45 years, I have finally figured it out. It's all psychological, meaning that one of you is psycho and the other one is logic. No, I'm not going to answer that question. I know what you're thinking, and no, I'm not going to answer that question. So, to get serious, a good marriage isn't something you find, but it's something you make. Let me say that again. A good marriage isn't something you find, it's something you make. And you keep on making it. A healthy marriage isn't always easy, but it's well worth fighting for. So on a serious note, if you've not heard anything I've said the last 3 to 4 weeks, hear this. After 45 years, I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that I've been there, done that, and yes, it is worth fighting for. If you're in that stage or that season of your marriage where you're just not sure, you're just not sure if your marriage is going to survive. Maybe there's been hurts, harsh words said. Maybe it's become a pattern, and you're just not sure if it's worth it anymore. I'm here to tell you, yes, it is. That it can get better. You can experience healing and restoration in your marriage. It takes a lot of work. And in my opinion, it takes a miracle. But that's what God is in. He's in the miracle working business. And he can do that. So Genesis 2:24, for this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and shall be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Matthew 19:6, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. What God has joined together, let no one separate. A good marriage isn't something you find, it's something you make. Let's take it a step further. A perfect marriage is just two imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other. A perfect marriage is just two imperfect people, not perfect, who absolutely refuse to give up on each other. Kathy and I got married when I was 18 years old. To be honest, at the time, I thought it was a great idea. I still think it was a good idea. But again, I did youth ministry for over 30 years. And in my youth ministry, as I look at the 18-year-olds in my youth groups and think, I got married at that age? That's crazy. But God was in it, and he worked it out. He made it work. But Kathy and I both had conversations before we got married about divorce, the potential of divorce, the possibility of divorce. And we both said it in our minds that we were committed till death do us part. That we took that seriously, that literally divorce was not an option for us. It just wasn't an option. Whatever else did or didn't work, we were going to find a way to make it work. We were both committed to figuring this thing out, and that divorce was not an option, period. Okay, now I said that, and I mean that sincerely, but I just want a small caveat or nuance, disclaimer maybe is a better word. my understanding, according to Scripture, the only reason for divorce is marital unfaithfulness. So if your partner is screwing around on you or is having an affair, then my understanding per Scripture, you have every reason and right to leave them. So when I said divorce is not an option, then obviously there's an exclusion for that. The second exclusion, now I cannot find this one in Scripture, if I'm being straight honest. So this is a Keith Baker editorial. But in Keith Baker's opinion, if staying married or staying with your spouse will put you or your children in harm's way. In other words, if there's physical abuse going on, then I believe that God sees that, He understands that, and would not expect you to stay there and be beat up or harmed or killed. Whether last week when we were talking about the love and respect, and we talked about love being unconditional love and respect being unconditional respect, and those are true. I do believe that to be true. But again, I don't believe that God would want you to stay in a relationship that could cause you physical harm, and or a relationship where the other person is being maritally unfaithful, having sex with someone else. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify that, because I'm sure there are some people arguing with that or struggling with some of those things. And again, I'm just trying to keep it real and deal with reality, but do it through the lens of Scripture and what that means. But aside from those two exceptions, and let's be honest, most of us, that's not the case. Aside from those two exceptions, a perfect marriage is just two imperfect people who refuse to give up on each other. John 15:13 says this: "There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend." There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend. So when we talk about marriage and love, and how do we express this love? Well, we read that verse, "There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friend." Most of us think about Jesus, who left heaven, came to earth, lived on earth for 33 years, gave up being God, and became a human for 33 years. That in itself is a huge, huge thing. But then He hung on the cross. He was whipped and beaten and strung up on a cross because of His love for you and His love for me. And it shows, I believe, the power of love, that it can drive you to do things that you wouldn't do normally, to become something that you wouldn't have become normally. So when I read this verse, "There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend," there's a couple questions come to mind. The first question is, would I die for Kathy? There's a story of the guy who kept telling his wife, "Well, baby, I love you so much. You know I'd die for you." And she said, "Well, you keep saying that, but you never have." Would I die for Kathy? I think I would. I believe I would. But I've never been put in that position, right? And who knows what I'd do in that position. I think I would do the right thing. But what if there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for a friend? Isn't about physically dying, but it's about dying to your selfishness, right? In other words, laying down my life, laying down some of my dreams, laying down some of my wishes, what I want to do today for that person. Let me phrase it another way. Maybe this will make more sense to you. Shouldn't our love for our spouse be greater than our love for everyone else? Shouldn't our love for our spouse be greater than our love for anyone else? If you answer that question, yes. Then this verse could read, There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's spouse. That's heavy. There's no greater love. If I truly want to love Kathy, I want to please her in the greatest way possible. This verse says, there's no greater love than to lay down one's life for Kathy. Am I willing to lay down my life for Kathy? Am I willing to die for Kathy? Yes. Am I willing to live for Kathy? Yes. What if, most of us struggle in this world, in this life, to try to find out what our purpose is in this life. You've heard me say on past podcasts that if you're still alive, if you're still on this earth, I believe that God's not done with you yet, and you're here for a reason. But what if that purpose, what if that reason is your spouse? In other words, what if my purpose on earth in this moment is to be there for my spouse? What if my ministry is to be there for my spouse? I believe that this marriage thing that God has created, I believe when we fully understand His intent, I believe me making the most out of my marriage, me honoring Kathy and loving Kathy and treating Kathy according to Scripture, the way I understand, is a way of worshiping God. It's a way of obeying God. It's a way of living out my life in a God-honoring way. Now, I know I've just thrown a whole lot at you, and I want you to think about that for a minute and process that my actions that I take towards Kathy isn't just about me and Kathy, but it's also about my relationship with God and my obedience to God's call. And what if God's calling on my life isn't just about going to church? It isn't just about teaching a Sunday school class. It isn't just about being a youth pastor or working with teens in youth group. It isn't just about fill in the blank, being a children's minister. But what if my calling from God is tied to my marriage to Kathy? And what I do to Kathy, how I treat Kathy, is a part of my fulfilling the calling that God has put on my life. Think about that for a minute. Let that soak in. There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's spouse. Genesis 1:27 NIV says, so God created mankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them male and female. And we talked about this briefly last week, how we believe that men and women are different. They see and hear and experience things through different lenses. But because God has created them male and female, we're not always going to see eye to eye, and we're not always going to agree on everything. And sometimes those disagreements will get heated. And we've got to figure out a better way of dealing with those moments. And I read this quote recently, and it really stuck with me, and I just wanted to share it here. In every disagreement in marriage, remember this one important truth. My spouse is my partner, not my enemy. We will either win together or we will lose together. Let me read that again. In every disagreement in marriage, there's going to be disagreements. We're going to have falling outs. We're not going to see eye to eye on everything. In every disagreement in marriage, remember this one important truth. My spouse is my partner, not my enemy. We will either win together or we will lose together, but we're in this together. Again, I feel like there's a lot of times in our culture And our society, oftentimes we become, all the men in one category and all the women in the other category, and it's the men versus the women. It's the husbands versus the wives, and if we're not careful, we can start seeing our spouse through the lens of they're the enemy. They're the one that causes my pain. They're the ones that I don't get along with. They're the one that's creating the trauma or the drama in my life. And we have to remember that that's a lie from the pit. That indeed, when we become one flesh, it's no longer me and her, it's us. We are one. And my spouse is now my partner, my teammate, and it's us versus the world, or us versus Satan. And we will get through it, and we will either win together or we will lose together, but we'll be together when everything's said and done. Ephesians 5:33, however, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Again, this is the love and respect conversation we started a couple of weeks ago, and we kind of touched on a couple of things. And if you recall, the definition for respect that was in this, I looked up, was a feeling of deep admiration for someone, or to hold someone in high regard. Other places it said things to the nature of to speak highly of or to praise. And so my question to the women here is, how often do you have a feeling of deep admiration for your spouse, for your husband? And maybe more importantly, how often do you express that out loud? How often do you tell him that? How you hold him in high regard, how important his thoughts are to you. How often do you say things in front of your friends about your husband that's positive, that's upbeat, that's respectful in front of him so he can hear you say those things? Do you speak highly of your husband to your friends, to your family, to your friends at church, your co-workers, those kind of things? Do you praise your husband? Again, to him sometimes, but more importantly, to others in front of him. Dr. Eggridge, his organization did a study of 7,000 couples. And the question was asked in this study, when you are in conflict with your spouse, do you feel unloved or disrespected? And 86% of the men stated that they felt disrespected when they were in a conflict with their spouse, where 72% of the women answered they felt unloved when they were in a conflict with their spouse. Now, again, I find this fascinating, that it's that pronounced, it's that black and white, that men do interpret things differently than women do. Now, again, this is important to understand. It did not say 100% of the men felt this, or 100% of the women felt this. It's 86% of the men. It's a large percentage. It's a large number. But it's not all men. And so I don't ever want to, we're talking in generalities here. It doesn't mean all men have to do this and men can't do that, or all women have to do this and women can't do that. Again, we're speaking in generalities. But by understanding some of these generalities, I think it'll help us as we're trying to understand our spouse, as we're trying to interpret their actions and the things they say and do, and why are they responding the way they're responding. I think it sheds a lot of light onto those things. Now, for the men, I want to share one of the things that Dr. Eggridge shares is the word couple. And each letter in the word stands for a word that helps you better understand your spouse, your female spouse, your wife, right? So this is for the men. That about the respect was for the women. This is for the men. The word couple, the C stands for closeness. She wants to be close to you. She wants you to be close to her. She wants to feel close to you. It's not just physical closeness, although that's important on occasion as well. But she wants to feel close to you. And she wants you to feel close to her. 2 is openness. She wants you to open up to her. Now, I get it. It doesn't come natural for most men. It just doesn't. Again, when things, especially during times of conflict and tension, many men draw back. They withdraw. They don't open up. And yeah, so, but that is part of what she is looking for, what she is needing. And if you can be more intentional as men to open up a little more often, or let her be a part of that, I think it will go a long ways into healing your relationship or restoring your relationship. Understanding, don't always try to fix her, but just listen to her. Or don't even always try to fix whatever the issue is, but just hear her, listen to her, and acknowledge it as she's saying these things, that you're listening, that you're hearing, that you're understanding what she's going through, what she's struggling with, what the battle is for her. Peacemaking. She wants you to say, I'm sorry, sometimes. Again, if you're like me, there are legitimate times when I need to say I'm sorry. There are times when I lose control, when I say stupid stuff. Or sometimes I'm just not thoughtful. I just didn't think about it, but it hurt her. I did things or said things, and I was just clueless. So there are times, legitimate times, when we need to say, I'm sorry. And somehow we have to get beyond our ego and our pride and do that. Loyalty. Okay, we're spelling out the word couple. C is closeness. O, openness. C is U is understanding. Sorry. P is peacemaking. She wants you to say, I'm sorry. L is for loyalty. She needs to know that you're committed to this marriage, that you're in on this, that you're working with her, fighting for this, that, again, it's you and her are going to win together, or you and her are going to lose together, but it's going to be together. And then finally, E is for esteem. She wants you to honor and cherish her, to help her. Women, a lot of women struggle with esteem issues, self-esteem issues, and they beat themselves up a lot of times, and they even overthink things sometimes. And I'm not throwing stones. I think they want to do and be the best they can for their spouse, for their husbands. And sometimes I think they just get, it means too much to them. They worry too much about it. It causes too much uncertainty for them. And I think if we can be a little more intentional as men to compliment them, legitimate compliments, if we can be a little more intentional about just sharing, honoring them and saying kind things to them, it can go a long ways towards, again, healing this relationship. Anyways, just some food for thought. Again, I appreciate all you guys coming and hanging out with us. Again, I believe that marriage is a very amazing thing. I believe it is a very sacred thing. I think it is something God created. I believe it becomes the foundation for our society and our culture. And a nation, I think, rises and falls based on these building blocks, these foundational stones. And I believe marriage is one of those foundational stones for our nation. And if we allow all the marriages to go away or be redefined or just die out, I think we are eroding the foundation of our nation. And it only brings more heartache, more chaos and more brokenness, which Satan wants, Satan loves, but it hurts people. Anyways, thanks a lot for coming out and joining us. We love you guys, and we will see you again next Monday. Adios.